When Sister Agatha died, they placed her in a simple coffin and left her overnight in the chapel. By morning, the carpenter refused to nail the lid shut. He said the nun had changed, that her hands were still warm, that her lips were still damp. The church conducted an inspection, declared it a miracle. But within a week, the water in the wells turned bitter, and the leaves began to blacken, crops rotted, births ended in silence. The priests ordered, bury her deeper. But the earth would not take the body. It returned to the chapel doorstep, dry but untouched by decay, pure as on the day she died. If the saint never died, then who curses this town? And what begs to be heard from beneath the ground? Saint Lord was the kind of town that seemed built from silence, tucked into the deep swamp valley of Louisiana. Its dirt roads sagged under the weight of humidity, and the buildings leaned as if tired from waiting for something that never came. People there didn't talk much. They didn't laugh loudly or cry in public. Life passed with the same unchanging rhythm as the bywater, slow, secretive, and heavy. The only building of any height was the old convent of St. Catherine, its bell tower rising like a crooked finger accusing the sky. The convent had stood for nearly a century, choked in ivy and coated with a thin film of swamp salt that clung to the stone-like skin. The wood of the pews was warped. The stained glass windows leaked when it rained. Most of the town believed it was a place for women to disappear into, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. It was where broken daughters and pious widows went to rot gracefully, behind thick walls and beneath watchful crucifixes. Sister Agatha had been one of them. Nobody knew where she came from, only that she arrived one afternoon in 1867 and never once stepped beyond the convent gates again. Over the decades, people forgot she was even alive. She spoke rarely, spent her days in prayer or tending the Wiltinger garden, and took a vow of silence after a storm destroyed the convent roof in 1881. Some said she had seen something in the lightning. Others claimed she simply stopped needing to speak. When she died in the spring of 1904, there were no tears. No family claimed her. Her death was announced during Sunday Mass by Father Delacroix, who said only that Sister Agatha had been received by the Lord in peace. The convent didn't ring the bell. The townspeople assumed it was because the mechanism had finally rusted through. The body was to be buried the next morning. The convent carpenter, who had been working on repairs to the chapel roof, hadn't yet built a proper coffin lid, so they laid her body out in the small chapel, on a simple pine wood slab, and draped her in white linen. Candles were lit, psalms were read, then the doors were closed. The next morning, the carpenter entered first. He would later claim that the air inside the chapel felt raw, not cold, but still, like breath held too long. He didn't speak of what he saw. He simply turned, walked outside, and vomited in the grass. Others went in, one by one. They emerged pale and trembling. Soon the convent was crowded with whispers, with footsteps, with eyes darting toward the chapel doors. Inside, Sister Agatha looked untouched by death. Her hands remained folded in perfect prayer. Her skin was smooth and pale, free of the gray tint of decay. There were no signs of rigor mortis. Her lips, slightly parted, appeared to have moisture on them. She seemed neither cold nor stiff. Some said her chest looked like it might be rising, as if breathing faintly beneath the linen. Word spread faster than fire. By evening, people from the next parish over had begun arriving. Children were lifted up to peer over the edge of the slab. Women crossed themselves and dropped to their knees. Someone said the smell of lilies lingered in the chapel. Another said the candles hadn't burned down at all since the night before. The bishop was summoned from Baton Rouge. He arrived 2 days later, examined the body, and declared it an unambiguous sign of divine incorruptibility. The church, he claimed, hadn't seen such miracles before. Bodies that did not decay, preserved by sanctity. Saints, he said, were sometimes chosen to remain intact, to testify to purity, to inspire faith. The townspeople were told to rejoice. Sister Agatha, long forgotten, had become their holy relic. They placed her in a new coffin, one with a glass lid and gilded trim, and moved it into the chapel's altar. Fresh flowers were brought daily. Candles burned day and night. Pilgrims began to arrive, first in handfuls, then in wagon loads. They left notes at her feet, whispered prayers, asked for healing. Some claimed to feel warmth radiating from the glass. Others said they heard weeping at night, soft, slow weeping that came from behind the altar. Then the insects came. At first it was small things, a few flies near the sacristy, beetles clinging to the corners of windows. but they multiplied. Thick clusters of gnats hovered in the air near the floorboards. Moths thudded against the stained glass. Day and night, parishioners swatted at things they couldn't see. Candles refused to stay lit for long, their flames smothered by the sluggish winds of unseen pests. In the convent basement, nuns began to notice the damp growing worse. Walls wept dark streaks that refused to dry. A smell like turned soil began to drift up through the wooden floorboards, especially at night, when the wind dropped and the chapel's silence deepened. At first, it was faint, barely more than the memory of damp roots, but it lingered, even after incense was burned. Children who visited the chapel sometimes cried afterward. For no clear reason, they complained of headaches, of strange dreams. One girl refused to eat for days after kneeling near the coffin. Her mother claimed she woke in the night screaming, her arms folded tightly over her chest, whispering words that weren't in English. Still, people came. Still they prayed. The bishop's letter had been framed and hung near the chapel entrance. Pilgrims read it aloud like scripture, and Sister Agatha remained unchanged. Her skin stayed smooth, her expression peaceful. Not a single hair had grayed or fallen. The flowers around her wilted daily, but she endured. One night, a woman cleaning the chapel alone claimed she saw condensation form inside the glass of the coffin. It was subtle, a slight fog near the upper corners. She wiped it away, and it returned an hour later. She said she could smell rain, though the sky outside was clear. She never returned to the convent again. As spring turned to summer, the insects worsened. Hornets nested under the eaves. Strange larvae writhed in the cracks of the altar steps. The chapel organ grumbled along its keys. And always, Sister Agatha lay at the center, motionless, untouched. Christine. By July, whispers returned, not of sainthood now, but of unease. Something was wrong, they said. Something unholy had been mistaken for divine. A body should not remain whole like that. A coffin should not fog from the inside. A chapel should not smell like the underside of earth. But no one dared move her. The bishop had left. The convent was all but deserted, and the swamp, thick and encroaching, pressed closer every week. Trees leaned in toward the building. Vines crept higher along the windows. The air grew heavier. The insects multiplied. No one remembered when the first well began to sour, but once it did, the rest followed. The heat pressed down heavier that week, not with the bite of summer, but with the wet suffocation of rot, the kind that made your clothes stick to your back, and your breath feel like it belonged to something else. Swarms of gnats hung over the fields like fog. Even the air had changed, thicker, slower, laced with something that clung to the back of the throat. Not decay, not sulfur, something older, something like turned soil pulled from deep, wet places. It began, people said, with the Lemoyne family's cow. She stopped moving one morning, stood stiff in the shade beside the barn, ribs moving shallowly. By noon, her eyes had turned gray, and when the old baker tried to milk her, the liquid came out in thick clots, sour and yellow. He swore later it had curdled inside her. That the udder was cold to the touch. His wife wouldn't let him bury the animal on their land, said it would poison the ground. He dragged the body out past the edge of town and left it near the waterline. By morning, it had sunk, though no one had seen it move. Then Marie's baby came early, too early. She screamed so loud that her neighbors came running, only to stop at the door. No midwife could do anything. When it was over, the child lay still, wrapped in a wet gray membrane like a sack that had broken. Its eyes were open, but they were too dark, as if filled with river silt. Marie wouldn't speak afterward. They said she wouldn't even hold a candle near her own window at night. Within a month, the gardens had gone bitter. The tomatoes cracked open on the vine, leaking black juice. The strawberries blackened at their centers like something had eaten its way out from inside. The well behind the chapel gave water that smelled faintly of iron and mushrooms. When boiled, it left a soft brown film at the bottom of the pot. The townsfolk tried to blame the swamp, but the swamp had always been there, and it had never done this. All the while, Sister Agatha lay in her glass tomb, unchanged, the same folded hands, the same faint curl at the corner of her mouth, the same waxy calm on her face. Children began to whisper that she was smiling more now, that her lips had parted, just slightly. The nuns said it was imagination, but every morning, someone would find the candles at the altar burned down to waxy stumps, even though no one had lit them. A few claimed the glass over her coffin fogged during the night, always from the inside. It left streaks, sometimes shaped like fingerprints. Then came the sound. At first, It was thought to be water, a drip, rhythmic and distant, like from a loose pipe or a leaky roof beam. But there were no leaks. The ceiling was dry, the walls were dry, yet the sound remained not loud, just insistent, like something gently tapping wood. It echoed through the chapel in the small hours before dawn, when even the insects stilled. Some said it wasn't water at all, but something softer, flesh on wood, a fingernail. The priests decided it was a test, a divine challenge. They gathered incense, lit censers, and read the old Latin rites aloud until their voices cracked. They conducted a midnight vigil, eyes red with sleeplessness, lips trembling over ancient syllables. But the air would not clear. The smoke drifted in strange spirals and then sank, heavy, refusing to rise. The flames dimmed and died, one by one, leaving the chapel in a strange, glistening dark. They relit the candles again. Again they went out. The following evening, Sister Madeline noticed something on the stove in the convent's kitchen. A name had been written in the dust, a single word traced by a finger. The name belonged to Marie's child, the one born 2 weeks before and buried before a priest could bless him. No one had spoken it since. They watched as the name blurred, the dust shifting without a breeze. Within minutes, it was gone. After that, fewer people entered the chapel. The daily pilgrims stopped. The air was too strange now, the candles too unreliable. The floorboards seemed to groan beneath invisible feet. The scent of earth, damp, soft, and strangely sweet, now clung to the walls like perfume. Even the crucifix above the altar seemed duller, its wood darker than before. The only ones who continued to visit were the children. They seemed drawn to the glass coffin. They pressed their fingers to the pane, watching for the fog to return. Some giggled, some sat quietly and stared for hours. One little girl brought a doll and left it at Agatha's feet. Another took to drawing on scraps of paper. In the dust, even on the chapel walls, the pictures always showed the same thing. Not the coffin, not the flowers, not the candles. They drew Sister Agatha standing outside her coffin, always wet, with drops sliding down her fingertips. The priests found the drawings disturbing, but burned them in silence. The mothers scolded their children, scrubbed their hands with vinegar, and kept them indoors. But it didn't help. Some children spoke of dreams, of walking through tunnels made of roots, of a woman in white who smiled but never blinked. A boy said she whispered to him, said she promised he wouldn't have to be alone underground. The dreams spread like fever. In the rectory, books began to mildew from the inside out. Hymnals split along their bindings, pages soft and speckled with blooming dark. One nun claimed the holy water had gone thick, but when she returned with another sister, the font was empty. By the second month, the fruit trees bore no fruit. The bees left. A black fungus crept along the well's edge, sleek and alive-looking. The bells of the convent had not run in weeks. The ropes were too damp, the metal too soft with corrosion. Still, Agatha remained perfect. Still smiling. Still whole. And beneath the chapel floor, the tapping began to sound closer. The decision came quietly, as if spoken through clenched teeth behind closed doors. The prior, pale and sweating through his vestments, wrote the letter himself. It was sent to the archdiocese in New Orleans by candlelight, sealed with trembling hands. The reply came 4 days later. A delegation would arrive to see the matter corrected. They did not say miracle. They did not say curse, only that the body was to be moved, and the faithful encouraged to forget. When the black carriage arrived, it did not bear a cross or a crest, only tar-covered wheels and brass handles dulled by time. The men who stepped down were not dressed as clergy. Their coats were long and buttoned high, their eyes flat and watchful. One of them carried a red-bound book with no title. They spoke little and only to the prior. The townsfolk watched from behind curtains and trees, pretending not to stare. They removed the coffin just after sundown. It took 6 men, though it should have taken fewer. The thing was heavy not by weight alone, but by something else, something that clung to the joints and dragged at the arms. The sisters stood in silence as the coffin was wheeled out of the chapel and into the courtyard. One nun fainted, another began whispering prayers until her tongue seized and she could only wheeze. The grave was dug at the far edge of the monastery grounds, in a part of the yard where weeds grew shoulder-high and insects chattered with strange insistence. The grave digger, an old widower named Bellamy, did not speak as he worked. He dug in silence, pausing only to wipe the sweat from his brow. Later, he told a neighbor that the earth beneath him had smelled not of rot or mud, but of clean rain wet and sweet. as though the sky had been buried beneath the roots. The hole was deeper than usual, far deeper. Bellamy had to build steps into the sides just to climb out. The men from New Orleans said nothing as they lifted the glass coffin and lowered it into the pit. One of them held a crucifix that had turned black around the chain. Another sprinkled salt in long arcs that never reached the ground. When the last shovelful of dirt was cast, they placed a wooden cross atop the mound and lit 3 candles in a triangle around it. The candles extinguished instantly. All 3. No wind, no breath, just out. At night, the monastery was still. The insects ceased their singing. The frogs near the swamp croaked once and went quiet. At dawn, when the bell should have tolled for morning prayers, the sisters found themselves unable to ring them. The ropes felt slick and brittle, as if soaked in oil. One sister ran to the chapel. The coffin stood on the steps, untouched, unbroken, the glass clear as ever. The body of Sister Agatha within, hands folded, habit crisp, but this time, her eyes were open, not wide, not startled, just open, as if watching, as if waiting. The prior wept openly when he saw her and had to be taken away. Panic loomed slowly, like mold on damp cloth. The delegation insisted on trying again. This time, they would take her farther beyond the edge of the parish, to the Blackwater marshes that no one visited, where the ground bubbled and trees leaned like old trunks. They brought the coffin at dusk. 2 torches were lit but burned cold, giving off no warmth. The air was thicker there, harder to move through. They buried her beneath a twisted cypress, where the water seeped up as they dug, dark and slick. The priest read a rite he had not spoken in years, a prayer meant for the lost and the unquiet. When the earth swallowed the coffin once more, they marked the site only with a stone, lank and smooth. No one spoke on the way back. For 2 nights, all remained still. On the 3rd, the church doors creaked open in the early hours before dawn. Sister Madeline, sweeping the steps, screamed when she saw what lay across the threshold. It was the body. Not the coffin, only the body, still in her habit, shrouded in linen, untouched by decay. Her hands rested gently on her chest. Her eyes were closed again, but across her chest, crawling and perfectly still, lay a cross formed from black flies. They did not buzz, they did not scatter, they pulsed together, as if breathing. The flies disappeared before anyone could collect them. The body was moved back into the chapel without ceremony. No prayers, no candles, just silent labor and locked doors. That week, 3 priests vanished. They were last seen walking together toward the old grain mill, long abandoned and collapsing near the edge of town. 4 days, no one could find them. On the 7th day, a foul stench led a group of boys to the cellar door. Inside, beneath the beams and spider webs, they found the 3 men kneeling in a perfect circle. Their mouths were filled with clay, packed tightly, eyes wide open, hands clasped in prayer. No blood, no wounds, just soil where speech should have been. The clay, when tested, came from deep beneath the swamp, far deeper than any recent floodwaters could have reached. The townspeople said nothing, but their silence deepened. Doors were bolted earlier, lanterns were kept lit through the night, children were forbidden from playing near the chapel. The sisters stopped singing. Still, every morning, the scent of fresh soil drifted through the monastery halls. Still, Sister Agatha remained in her glass tomb. Still watching. The winter months crawled over St. Laurent like mildew, soft and slow, seeping into wood and bone. A silence took root in the monastery different from prayer, heavier than mourning. The body of Sister Agatha remained untouched, her flesh pale and smooth as candle wax, her eyelids still sealed, though a few claimed to have seen them flutter just before dawn. A strange moisture hung in the chapel air, like breath exhaled from beneath the floorboards. Brother Elias, once a novice with no particular gift for faith or learning, found the book while reorganizing the monastery library. It had no place on any shelf, nor mention in any record, no spine, no cover, just a thick collection of brittle pages sewn by hand, written in tight Latin script that appeared to shift slightly when read for too long. The title page bore a single word in faded ink under it. The letters curved and aged like veins in a dead leaf. The contents were worse. The first chapters spoke in riddles of cycles and vessels, of flesh unspoiled and vows that echoed beyond breath. The book did not speak of miracles, it spoke of states of something between life and death, a suspension granted not by heaven but by the denial of ending. It described a rite, outlawed in the 15th century by papal decree, called sanctified stasis. Those who took vows of complete purity bodily, spiritual, and vocal were, in some rare cases, refused by the soil after death. Not rejected, refused. Their corpses remained intact because they had never truly been claimed by the world of the living to begin with. The author anonymous, possibly Monastico, these people echoed, and warned that their persistence was not a sign of grace, but a spiritual knot left untied. Brother Elias took careful notes, even as his hands trembled and his eyes watered from the dust and ink. He described the phenomenon in a series of letters, the first few of which he hid inside hymnals in case it disappeared. One made it to the diocesan archive in Baton Rouge, tucked behind a baptismal register. It included a drawing even, but clear of a ritual circle. The rite described required an anointed burial, but not within sacred ground, not even within ordinary soil. The place had to be untouched by baptism or prayer. Wild, forgotten, nameless. Only then, the book said, could the cycle be closed without collapse. In the margins, Elias wrote the phrase, "She was never meant to be seen." But no one could move her. Attempts to remove the body from St. Laurent failed with increasing violence. Wagons broke their axles at the edge of town. Animals refused to pull her. On one occasion, a horse began to convulse as soon as the wheels turned toward the bridge out of the parish. It had to be put down. In another instance, the wooden beams of a cart collapsed inward, as though crushed by unseen weight. Onlookers swore the nails turned to ash in the hands of the builders. A child riding nearby began to sob uncontrollably, pointing toward the body and muttering, "She wants to stay," over and over until her lips split from the cold. The prior ordered her left where she was. They moved her coffin to a side chapel, sealed it behind carved oak doors, and tried not to mention it in sermons. But the town noticed. Children stopped being born, slowly at first, a few miscarriages, a stillbirth, then longer gaps between pregnancies, then silence. The midwife said her hands had gone stiff with waiting. Baptismal basins stayed dry. Mothers walked the streets with dull eyes and empty arms, staring too long at shadows. One night, a woman in her third trimester threw herself into the swamp. Her body found tangled in reeds the next morning, belly torn open and empty. The soil, according to Indurate, demanded a portion of what it had been denied. The remainder must be paid in kind. Brother Elias read that passage aloud once, in a whisper, to an empty hallway. The next day, he found every candle in the monastery chapel melted down to a puddle of wax, though none had been lit. The sisters began to sicken, though no cause could be found. Not flu, not fever, just a fading, like candlelight in fog. One nun lost her voice, another forgot her own name, a third was found weeping beside the sealed chapel, saying she could hear soft knocking from the other side of the door. Elias stopped sleeping. He continued reading the book, noting that the echoed those preserved in such states acted as spiritual anchors. Their presence distorted divine intention. Grace couldn't pass through them. Prayers turned in circles. Time twisted in their vicinity. The longer the body remained, the more the land around it became misaligned. The book called this the quiet bending. It was not supernatural. It was natural, just not for this world. Outside the monastery, plants bloomed in winter. A tree grew fruit with no seeds. A man buried in the old cemetery was found above ground again, coffin splintered, mouth open. He'd been dead 6 months. The coroner said the organs were soft, as if thawed too quickly. Brother Elias sent a final letter before his disappearance. In it, he claimed that Sister Agatha was never a saint, that she had fulfilled her vows so completely, the world itself did not know what to do with her, that she had become a wound in the fabric of mortality, a perfect soul trapped in an unbroken vessel, a vessel now leaking into the world. He urged the church to act, not to bury her, not to pray, but to forget, to erase, to remove all records, all mention, all memory. That was the only closure left, not sacrament, but severance. No one knows what happened to Brother Elias. Some say he fled into the swamp with the book. Others say they saw him walking the fields at dawn, speaking to something only he could see. What is known is this: the chapel doors remain locked. The body is still there, and in the deadest hours of the night, you can sometimes hear the sound of slow, deliberate breath beneath the floor. It smells like earth, but not soil. Something older, wetter, like something waiting to be covered or uncovered. By the spring of 1907, St. Laurent was no longer recognizable. The town had become hollow and abandoned, but abandoning, one by one, Homes collapsed into themselves as if exhaling for the last time. Paint peeled in sheets, doors gaped open to empty rooms, and floorboards bloated from moisture even when the air was bone dry. It rained only once that year, but everything remained wet. The walls, the windows, the breath behind every whisper, it all shimmered with a sweat that didn't belong. The ground grew soft underfoot. Gardens refused to grow, not from drought but from something subtler. Tomatoes split open like wounds. Potatoes turned black in the soil. Trees wept sap that reeked of vinegar and iron. The well water turned viscous and cloudy, coating the tongue like oil. People boiled it, filtered it, prayed over it, but still it slicked their throats and left behind a taste like rusting nails. Inside the monastery, nothing changed, or perhaps it changed too much. The glass coffin had been moved again this time into a stone room beneath the vestry, sealed behind thick walls with only one door. The monks called it the cell, though no one volunteered to guard it. The room had no plumbing, no moisture, and yet the walls sweated. Shapes bloomed in the stone like bruises, long, faint silhouettes, as though garments soaked in water had been pressed against them. No one dared to touch the stains. No one dared to name what they resembled. At night, those who passed above the cell heard the sound of dripping water. Not a pipe, not a leak. The rhythm was too steady, too deliberate, like breath falling drop by drop into a basin. A man named Marcel, once a bell founder, returned to St. Laurent to install a new tower bell in Sister Agatha's name. They said he hadn't known the full story. He built it over 3 days, blessed it himself, and raised it with the help of the monks. But when the rope was pulled to ring it for the first time, the bell came loose. It didn't swing, it fell, straight down, as though gravity had taken. 2 monks were crushed. The third lost his hearing and later claimed he could still hear the ringing in his teeth. After that, the town stopped trying to sanctify anything. The people, what remained of them, turned to superstition. Some burned their icons, others carved crosses into the floorboards or buried salt in the corners of their homes. The church no longer held mass. The pews gathered mold. Even the choir loft, once echoing with him, now stank of rot and dust. Then the children began to vanish. The first was a boy named Henri. He had been drawing outside with chalk when his mother turned away for a breath. When she looked again, the lines were still on the stones, houses, trees, a figure with arms outstretched, but Henri was gone. 2 days later, it was found asleep near the monastery gates. His hands were folded neatly over his chest. He didn't wake up. Doctor said he was in a coma, but his breathing was too steady, too slow, as if mimicking something. 2 more disappeared the following week. A girl collecting eggs, a toddler playing in the field. Both were found days later in the same state, silent, unmoving, with peaceful expressions and folded hands. Each was laid to rest, but not buried. The townspeople refused. They were afraid the ground would reject them, or worse, take them in. Rumors spread like mildew. Some claimed Sister Agatha was no longer confined to her coffin, that she moved in shadow, choosing vessels, that her body was not the miracle but the tool, that she was shifting, occupying new shells to preserve her vow. The faithful called them sleeping saints. Others said they were just hollow children. The monks tried to burn the coffin. They brought it into the clearing outside the chapel, surrounded it with firewood and poured lantern oil until the grass turned black. The fire sparked, smoke rose, but the wood of the coffin only darkened and it never cracked, never hissed. The flame shrank back from it. The monks stood in silence, watching as the blaze refused to consume. One of them reached to touch the coffin, and his fingers blistered instantly, not from heat, but from something cold that bit deep and fast, like winter beneath ice. After that, no one touched the coffin again. A smell began to linger in town, not rot, not sewage. It was older, thicker, like a cellar locked to loam or dirt dug up from under forgotten graves. It clung to clothing. It bled through walls. No amount of scrubbing removed it. People wore scarves inside their homes. A woman named Estelle tried to mask the scent with lavender. Within a week, the lavender bushes around her house died. Her house turned black with mildew. The cemetery filled with insects, not ants or beetles, but something like wingless flies, pale and slow, crawling in loops. They covered the headstones in spirals. The grave of Sister Agatha's parents cracked open from beneath, though the coffins inside remained untouched. Whatever was shifting beneath the surface had no interest in the past. The town's clock tower stopped working. Birds no longer sang. Dogs refused to enter the churchyard. One night, a cow was found dead beside the chapel, its legs tucked under its body, its eyes open. staring directly at the vestry. Its tongue had been removed. No blood, just a clean absence. The few who still believed in redemption said this was a test, that endurance would bring salvation, that Sister Agatha's incorruptibility was proof of divine presence. But they didn't stay long. One by one, they moved away, or stopped speaking, or simply disappeared, leaving their homes behind with meals still on the table. By midsummer, St. Laurent had fewer than 30 living residents, fewer still who slept through the night. The rest simply waited for the breath beneath the floor, for the weight in the air, for the next child to vanish. And all the while, in the sealed stone cell beneath the church, the sound of dripping continued. One drop, then silence, then another. By 1911, the monastery's record ceased. The final entry, penned in a hand more resigned than devout, read, "We left the body in the chapel. If she leaves, let her. If she remains, let them pray." No signature, no close in prayer, just those words, etched in iron ink across yellow parchment, as if someone had written them with the last light of a dying candle. After that, the monastery fell silent. The monks who stayed either disappeared or took vows of silence so absolute that even their footsteps seemed muffled. Only one family remained in the town, descendants of the apothecary. They kept the key to the chapel, though no one could say why. They didn't attend to it, didn't dust it, didn't pray. They passed the key down like a disease, wrapped in cloth and buried in drawers. It was said they could hear movement inside the chapel at night, soft, slow, wet steps that never wandered far but never stayed still. The sound of waterlogged sandals on ancient stone. One boy from the family, curious and defiant, once pressed his ear to the chapel door. What he heard made his nose bleed. He didn't speak again for the rest of his life. Further north, in the Eparchy archives, a letter survived. No one knows who filed it. The ink had bled slightly into the paper, as if it had absorbed the weight of what it confessed. The hand was familiar, likely the abbot, who had tried and failed to bury the incorrupt sister. The letter was addressed to no one. It read, "This was not a miracle. It was a delay. We interrupted the order. We withheld what the ground was meant to take, and so it has taken everything else." They had tried to make a saint. They had dressed her in white, sealed her in glass, and placed her on a pedestal of stone and silence. They mistook preservation for purity, forgetting that some things linger not because they are holy but because they are unfinished. Each year, on the 3rd of July, date of her death, though some said it was the date of her return, a sound rang through what remained of St. Laurent. The bell had long been removed after the accident, melted down and cast into nails no one dared to use, but the sound still came, low, mournful, and distant, as though rung from beneath the chapel floor, echoing through the bones of the town. And when it ran, something changed in the air. Birds stilled, dust hung heavier, flies gathered on windows that had been shut for decades. Those who still passed near the chapel said the stained glass window glowed slightly at dusk, revealing a face smooth, ageless, and wan. The eyes remained closed, the mouth relaxed, but the skin was too pale, the features too symmetrical, as though remembering the shape of a woman without ever having known one. Some believed she still lay there. Others claimed she now stood behind the altar, hands folded in prayer, her habit damp and smelling of lilies and mold. No one checked, no one dared. The land around the chapel refused to forget. Grass wouldn't grow, trees leaned away from it, animals skirted its edge. Rain lingered longer on the stone than anywhere else in the valley. Mold bloomed beneath shingles, even in sun, and always that smell, like old earth disturbed, not rot, but rehearsed decay, awaiting. By 1923, no children had been born in St. Laurent for over a decade. A midwife had once attempted to deliver a child in the apothecary's home, but the infant never cried. It had no eyes, just smooth skin, sealed and unmarked. The mother bled out before morning, and the child was buried without a name. The few remaining families left shortly after. They whispered stories in the towns they fled to. They described the silence, the dreams, the black veins in the trees. One woman said she dreamt of a woman in a habit kneeling beside her bed each night, just kneeling, just listening. By 1950, St. Laurent had vanished from most maps. Only cartographers knew of it, and even they noted the strange error. Satellite images showed no building, no sign of human settlement, but radio signals bent strangely near the valley. Compasses spin in brief stutters when passing over its coordinates. Weather balloons malfunctioned directly above. And still, Every 3rd of July, someone heard the bell. It echoed across empty fields, through the cracked bones of the town, through the cellar doors and the chimneys and the broken wells. It rang 7 times, then stopped, and in the silence that followed, a pressure would settle like a hand placed gently on the back of the neck. The key remained with the apothecary's line. The last to hold it was a woman named Celeste. She kept it buried beneath her garden in Baton Rouge, wrapped in 12 layers of cloth and iron. In her journals, she wrote of the dreams, always the chapel, always the stained glass, always the sound of footsteps moving in slow circles. On her final entry, she wrote only one sentence: as long as they call her a saint, the ground won't forget. There were those who tried to canonize her. A petition circulated once among distant dioceses arguing the preservation of her body as proof of divine grace, but the signatures faded from the page, literally vanished like breath from a mirror. The petition was never found again. And yet the myth persisted. Pilgrims came and never returned. Some wrote of miracles, of visions, of peace. Others were found weeks later silent, sunken-eyed, with soil beneath their fingernails. None remembered why they had gone. But still, the image was sold. Icons were painted. Medals were cast. Candles lit in her name. Saint Agatha of Saint Laurent. Saint of incorruptibility. Saint of unanswered prayers. But in the walls of the chapel, beneath the stained glass and stone, something else remembered. Not a saint, not a woman, not even a spirit, just a delay, stretched thin across time, an interruption, unresolved. And the longer the name was spoken, the deeper the town sank. Because the body did not rot. And so the town rotted in its place.